Hello and welcome to PFF Now. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Ari, how are you doing today?
Doing really well. Hopefully, everyone had a great Thanksgiving weekend, had another great week of football, and we're here at the stretch run. So many good teams. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and we're going to have a really exciting end to the season here coming up.
Brad, how are you doing
Yeah, I
today?
feel like with Thanksgiving Thursday, we had two different football slates already for this weekend. But we talked about it. It was a playoff leverage weekend. I think Ari, your tweet said 7 of the 11 matchups featured teams above 500. So every result this week mattered a lot.
Let's start this off by talking about the small outbreak of COVID that's going around the Dallas Cowboys organization. Head coach Mike McCarthy will miss Thursday's game against the New Orleans Saints. This comes on the back of Amari Cooper being on the COVID list, Terrence Steele, a number of coaches and assistants, but obviously being without your head coach for a game like this when the Cowboys have been, kind of struggling a little bit of late. This is a major deal, especially with a Thursday night game. If it was a Sunday game, then it's possible that McCarthy would have been able to come back in time, but that will not be the case. The Cowboys did announce that McCarthy is out for Thursday against the Saints. Ari, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very concerning for a number of reasons. Obviously, not having your head coach is a big deal. The Cowboys do have a number of people on that staff who could replace him for at least one game, but I think it's just worth noting the timeline of events here in Dallas of how this all has really gone down. I've been trying to figure out exactly where this all has really started from. I have not been able to confirm 100% if it's accurate or not, but Amari Cooper appears to be the first player who has tested positive here. It happened on a Friday before their game on Kansas City. Now, there is a possibility there was a staff member who tested positive as well before him, but regardless, ever since that happened on that Friday, there have been a number of players and a number of coaches have tested positive ever since, including a number of other receivers, their tight end Blake Jarwin. Doug, you mentioned Terrence Steele, their starting right tackle. And then all these other coaches, including Joe Philbin, their offensive line coach, a number of strength and conditioning coaches. So there is an actual outbreak here in Dallas. And if it actually did start from Amari Cooper, there is obviously that scenario where he is an unvaccinated player. And the NFL did put some rules in there this year that if this does become serious, there could be some serious consequences for Dallas. Now, we're nowhere near getting to that point, but with a short week here in Dallas coming up against the Saints on Thursday night, if this keeps on going, I think it is something just to keep on monitoring, especially as this has been going on for a number of days now with more and more people testing positive there in Dallas.
Yeah, I know they've obviously lost their last couple games, but I do think the difference between this Dallas Cowboys team and maybe years prior is their depth. So you mentioned Terrence Steele. Obviously, Lael Collins was a starting right tackle to begin the year. They also have Ty and Secchi there, who's a very good swing tackle. Even at coaching, they have an assistant head coach who is expected to be the head coach on Thursday. He is not the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, or special teams coordinator. So having that infrastructure and having some depth, so to speak, both in the coaching staff and with personnel should go a long way. And I think this is a huge game for them. Obviously, Philadelphia losing to the Giants makes things a little bit comfortable in that NFC East, but that first round bye is still pretty wide open. And I think this is a must win against the Saints to stay in contention for that bye.
And in a normal circumstance, this would probably be a relatively easier week for the Cowboys, given the Saints' recent struggles as well. But who knows what's going to be happening at this point now without their head coach. And, this could continue to spread, obviously, since Thanksgiving was on Thursday. A lot of people were around their families, and the NFL is increasing the protocol this week anyway by testing players and coaches and everyone on Monday and on Wednesday. Let's talk a little bit about injuries over the weekend. As usual, lots of major injuries. The one that I'm monitoring the most is 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel. It does sound like he avoided a major injury, but NFL media's Ian Rappaport reported that he will have an MRI on his groin. He's expected to miss some time, but not considered to be a major injury. So certainly don't expect him to be out for the rest of the season. But the 49ers are really starting to come on strong here, and it's on the back of Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is the best player on that offense. He's probably their best running back. He's probably their best wide receiver. When Elijah Mitchell is kind of limited by the injuries that he's had, they've been using Deebo Samuel more in that running back role, and they're able to just because of the size of Deebo Samuel. He's a really unique player. 5'11", 215 pounds. He's bigger than most running backs really around the league at this point, other than really big players like A.J. Dillon or Ramondre Stevenson, those types of backs. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the 49ers can adjust without that major weapon in their offense. Maybe they'll be willing to get Brandon Ayuk a little bit more involved. I think more will be put on Elijah Mitchell's shoulders. He's been really good as a rookie running back, but that's with Deebo Samuel in the offense. So hopefully for the 49ers case, this is only a couple week injury, but we'll really get a better sense of the timeline here, depending on whether or not the 49ers place Deebo Samuel on injured reserve, because that would mean that he would have to miss 3 games. Brad, what's an injury that you're monitoring this week?
Yeah, I mean, Deebo Samuel quietly has the second most scrimmage yards in the NFL. I feel like it's like going under the radar, which is kind of crazy because he's so versatile and so good. But yeah, I mean, I'm sticking, I guess not sticking at the running back position, but Dalvin Cook in Minnesota. So he apparently has now torn the other labrum in his shoulder. He was already dealing with a shoulder issue on the other side. Minnesota has apparently come out and said the plan is to rest him for a couple weeks right now, but to gear up for the playoffs. He apparently did this when they went into New Orleans and beat the Saints. He also had a shoulder issue then, had 2 touchdowns, and I think over 100 yards from scrimmage in that game. So that's the plan they're going to adopt, which is tough because that loss to the 49ers is huge for them in terms of getting in as a wild card in the NFC, although Alexander Madison had a nice touchdown run in that game. And ultimately, it comes down to Kirk Cousins finding Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson downfield. That is what will make this team go. But obviously a huge loss because Dalvin Cook, I mean, they lean on him as much as any team relies on their running back.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook is a major injury, and we'll see how long he eventually ends up missing. They do have a valuable backup there in Alexander Madison, who could eventually replace him for a couple of weeks. But the injury I'm going to go with is it sounds like it's going to be a season-ending one. It is Browns All-Pro right tackle Jack Conklin, who went down early in the game last night, tried to walk it off, didn't go well for him. His knee buckled up on him. He had to be carried to the sideline and then eventually carted to the locker room. And he was actually just returning from a 3-game absence with an elbow injury. And when you look at the Browns and you look at Baker Mayfield, who is quite literally dealing with injuries all over his body, the last thing he needs is to lose an all-pro offensive tackle for the season. Conklin was PFF's #1 rated right tackle last season. They're going to have to rely on Blake Hance, who Baker Mayfield famously called a guy named Blake last year after he stepped in. So they have a bye coming up, which should help Baker. But overall, this is a team that is not scoring points, and losing Jack Conklin likely for the season is not going to help at all for this team right now. So it's a big loss there in Cleveland.
About 2/3 of the way through the season now. So let's talk about potential MVP candidates. My guy is a player. A lot of people have heard of him, Tom Brady. And it's for a couple of simple reasons. First of all, he's PFF's highest graded quarterback so far this season. Pretty amazing what he's still able to do in his early 40s, now entering his mid 40s. But the other thing for me with Brady and why he would be my MVP candidate at this point is that he's one of the guys who hasn't missed a game so far this season. A lot of those other MVP candidates that are out there, Kyler Murray's missed a couple of games now. Aaron Rodgers was forced to miss a game. Dak Prescott was forced to miss a game. A lot of these guys have had to miss games. And Tom Brady, despite his ripe old age of 44, has not missed a game so far. Buccaneers are still one of the best teams in the NFC. Maybe he's not putting up the most gaudy stats this season, but he's compiling stats this year. He leads the NFL in passing touchdowns, only has 9 interceptions. Like I mentioned earlier, he is PFF's top-rated quarterback so far this season with a 91.5 grade. Also, PFF's highest graded passer so far this season with a 90.1 grade. So just another vintage Tom Brady season. Like I said, maybe it gets boring after a while to always have Tom Brady up there in the MVP rankings, but he would be my choice right now. Ari, who would be your choice for MVP?
Yeah, I think Tom Brady is possibly one of the guys on top right now. I mean, I really don't think there is a clear favorite right now. I mean, there just isn't. And the Jonathan Taylor stuff was fun while it lasted, but the chance of that happening, it just feels unlikely based off the position and where the Colts are right now. I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers repeating, obviously having another spectacular year. Had to miss a game due to COVID. We all heard about that enough. But the thing that sticks out to me is really looking at this Packers schedule coming up. 3 out of their final 6 games will be in front of a national audience, and that includes a Christmas Day game. If Aaron just does his thing in front of the whole country, continues to be the awesome player that we all know, and he does it in primetime action, the chances of him getting it just goes up. I feel like if you're able to do it in front of everyone and everyone is talking about you, especially later in the year, that's really where people eventually take over and get the award. I feel like that is a great possibility there for Aaron to go and win it. And they're going to eventually get back all-pro left tackle David Bakhtiari, his good friend. And while we're on the Packers topic over here, I feel like it's probably worth mentioning that Matt LaFleur, Coach of the Year, I think he should be right up there. If all that they've dealt with this year, all the injuries, what he's been able to do with that team ever since he really got there has been spectacular. And I think Assistant Coach of the Year, Joe Barry, the defensive coordinator, has also been spectacular. Without Jair Alexander, without Zadarius Smith, a spectacular effort there in Green Bay by everyone involved. But there isn't a clear favorite for MVP. I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers trying to win it here in these final 6 weeks.
I think the narrative angle is a great angle, but I think working against them could be the fact that they've made, back-to-back NFC championship games. So it's kind of the expectation versus what's happened. Yeah. Otherwise, I think both guys should probably be near the top of the conversation. For that reason, though, I'm going to go with a guy who I think has kind of emerged the last couple of weeks. Again, a bit of a lackluster group. So not saying in a normal year, he'd probably be a name for me, but it's got to be Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. He's now our third graded quarterback. He's, I want to say, second in adjusted completion percentage. He's second in yards per attempt, and also top 5 in adjusted completion percentage. So just playing really good football, but also we saw last year how bad this team is without him, obviously picking 5th overall. So I think that kind of narrative baked in obviously also plays into comeback player of the year with him and Dak Prescott. But I think he's creeping up that conversation, especially if they win the AFC North and kind of this vaunted tough division where Aaron Rodgers kind of just skates his way through the laughable NFC North. I think that narrative and all that can start to build.
For sure. Let's also talk about players who have helped their free agency stock coming up this offseason, impending free agents who are really having solid seasons. And I'll start off with Patriots cornerback J.C. Jackson. And it's kind of amazing with the season that J.C. Jackson is having at this point. He's only allowing a 38.1 passer rating. He's got 7 interceptions. The Patriots placed a second-round tender on him this offseason. Any team could have signed him to a contract, got him for a second-round pick. I know that there were some teams were cap-strapped because of COVID and because of the limitations of lowering the salary cap. But now J.C. Jackson's having really his best NFL season, and he's going to be a free agent this offseason. So you probably could have got a discount on Jackson last offseason. You would have had to give up a second-round pick, but still probably would have been worth it to sign him for a contract maybe half as high as he would be getting now. But like I said, he'll be a free agent. One thing, one stat on J.C. Jackson that was pretty amazing, over the last 4 games, and the Patriots are in the midst of a 6-game winning streak, but in the last 4 games, Jackson has allowed 4 catches for 19 yards with 4 interceptions. So he has as many interceptions as he's, allowed catches this season. And another thing with J.C. Jackson, just because he is a free agent this offseason, I think that last year there might have still been some questions about whether he could be that number 1 lockdown cornerback on a team, just because he did have Stephon Gilmore on the roster with him. He got a lot of help from Gilmore, got a lot of help from guys like Devin McCourty. This year, he's more off on an island on his own with Gilmore on the Carolina Panthers. So he's proven that he could be a number 1 cornerback on a really good defense. The other thing that he's proven is that he's more than just a man cornerback. And that's something that the Patriots did a lot in the past, was run a lot of man coverage. J.C. Jackson has always thrived in man coverage. This year, they're using a lot more zone. They're using more cover 3, using more cover 2, and he's still being just as productive, locking down wide receivers just as well. So, it doesn't matter what system a team runs, that J.C. Jackson's going to be out there making plays. Since he came in the league in 2018, he has 26 interceptions, including playoffs. Not including playoffs, he's at 24. I saw a stat over the weekend that Xavier Howard, since 1990, got 25 career interceptions in the fewest games. I think it was something like 65 games, something like that. J.C. Jackson's 1 away, and he's only played 55 games or 56 games. So it's pretty amazing the amount of interceptions that he's accumulated in his short career. Ari, who's an impending free agent that you think has really helped himself this season?
Yeah, JC Jackson has been just an awesome story there in New England. Undrafted, by the way. Another great story, another great part about him. I'm going to go with a guy who was a first-round pick, but a guy who was labeled a bust after 3 years, and that is Hassan Reddick, the Carolina Panthers pass rusher. Arizona declined his fifth-year option when he was there, and then all of a sudden last year, he breaks out for 12 and a half sacks, had 6 forced fumbles, 56 total pressures according to PFF. And he became a free agent after the season, thought somebody would throw a big bag of money at him, and it just didn't happen. So he was basically told, hey, you got to do it one more time, prove it to us. And he ends up signing in Carolina and reuniting with Meirov, who was his college head coach at Temple. And all he's done this year is once again put up big numbers. He has 10 and a half sacks so far this year. That is top 5 in the NFL. He's been solid as a run defender as well. Obviously has not really been a flashy name. You don't really hear about him that much, but a guy who has produced and a guy who could be in line to finally get that big payday that he expected to have last year. He could have it happen here this offseason if he keeps this up.
Yeah, I saw a stat that he has 16 sacks over his last 16 games. So, I mean, just continues to produce at a relatively new position. He's almost like a throwback Micah Parsons of sorts, although he's kind of undersized a little bit, but it's not proven to be much of a problem out there in Carolina. And I think a handful of teams would probably have, find a spot for him. But I think an obvious answer for this one is Orlando Brown with the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think the big thing here is, of course, there's always the leverage that comes with when you get traded for a big return. Obviously, you're up for a big contract. But I think it's hard to define how different of a system he went to from Baltimore to Kansas City, two polar opposite offenses in every single capacity. And he's been great. And Kansas City now is back on the top of the AFC West. And we're kind of done talking about them being dead and them needing to figure things out. They're right back in the mix and very well could win the AFC at this point for all we know. So I think he's going to get that monster deal he was looking for. And credit to him for sticking to his guns, what he believed in, getting out of a really good situation in Baltimore and going to another good situation in Kansas City.
All right, let's take some of your questions. We've got one here from Berman who asks, which team not in the playoffs right now will end up making it? So, Ari, I'll throw this one to you off the bat. What do you think is a team that's currently not in the playoff picture that you think could wind up sneaking in here?
Yeah, I know this team lost this week, but I'm going to go with the Colts. And, they've really come together here over the last month and a half or so. Of course, we talked about Jonathan Taylor here a little bit earlier. People think he could be an MVP candidate. Maybe he is, but what he's been able to do on the ground and in the receiving game as well, really since week 4 has been tremendous. Over 100 scrimmage yards and a touchdown in, I believe it was 8 straight games. Yesterday he had 97 total yards, just missed a new record, but he has been fabulous. Carson Wentz has played well enough. He has not been making those dumb mistakes that he made in Philadelphia. He had a couple of those in a game against Tennessee, but he hasn't had as many as he had down there in Philadelphia. And the defense has also been pretty great, pretty good, especially Darius Leonard, who is really just a turnover machine, forced fumble after forced fumble every single game, has a couple of interceptions as well. I think that team has really come together. They're 6-6 on the year on the outside looking in right now, but looking at their schedule, they have the Texans coming up. They have the Jaguars to end the year. So they have a couple of winnable games there as well. And then the Patriots, Cardinals, and Raiders are there stuck in the middle of their schedule. A bunch of tough games, but games that they could be competitive in. That AFC is wide open. There are 7 playoff spots. I think the Colts, with what they have building over there with Frank Reich as the head coach, I think that's a team to watch for sure here for the stretch run of the season.
Brad, which team not in the playoffs currently do you think winds up making it?
I'll go with another team that lost this weekend and I think really blew a massive opportunity, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles, because almost every NFC wildcard team lost this week. New Orleans lost on Thursday. Carolina looked awful. They're probably not going to right the ship, figure things out. You had Minnesota playing San Francisco, so one of those two teams had to lose that game. I guess Minnesota, so they could have tied. They didn't have to lose that game. But and Philly gets the New York Giants. And look, it's a division game on the road against a good defense coached by Patrick Graham, the DC there, and he showed up and kind of made the entire national media look silly after we talked up Jalen Hurts all week, and then he was god awful in that game. But They still have one of the easiest schedules remaining. They have the Jets coming up. They still have the host the Giants. They get 2 games against the Washington football team, I believe. So they can still control their own destiny. I'm sticking with that pick, even though they kind of embarrassed me right out of the gate.
I'm actually sticking with you on the Philadelphia Eagles. It's the schedule, and I'm really not convinced that the Vikings at this point, they would be the 7th seed in the NFC, that they're actually going to be, making the playoffs this year. So then you're picking between the Falcons, the Saints, the Eagles, Panthers, Washington football team. And just because of that schedule, I do think that the Eagles right the ship here. And really, they would have had a really good chance of winning that game if Jalen Reagor had caught one of those passes at the end there. The second drop especially, he was in good position to make the play, just bounced right off of his hands. It's always interesting to see when a player doesn't always, react the most calmly to that. And Devontae Smith kind of had an outburst a little bit over not getting targeted on that play. You can understand it, though. He's streaking down the field wide open with his arm raised, and Jalen Hurts didn't see him, went back to Jalen Reagor on that play, didn't wind up targeting Devontae Smith. And like I said, Reagor dropped the pass. But, yeah, I just think that with the strength of schedule and everyone who's above them, I just still think that there's a very direct path for the Eagles to make it. And out of the teams currently in the playoff picture, I'm the least convinced by the Vikings. In the AFC, you'd have to pull out a team like the Chargers or the Bills to have an AFC team make it. In the NFC, it comes right down to the 49ers, who I think are, like I said earlier, on a hot streak. Vikings not quite as convinced. Let's get into a question here from Tara Darrell. Do you think the inconsistent health/play from the top quarterbacks helps Jonathan Taylor's MVP case? I just don't love the running back MVP. And I know that that's kind of the way that it's been throughout the history of the NFL, but I'm just not convinced that, Jonathan Taylor's had a great season, but I'm not convinced that Jonathan Taylor is more valuable to his team than the best offensive tackle in the NFL, or the best wide receiver, or the best defensive tackle, or pass rusher, or cornerback. So to me, no, I think that it'll still wind up. I think it will be more clear by the end of the season. One quarterback's going to wind up emerging, and I think that he'll wind up being the MVP. Like I said earlier, I think it'll still be Tom Brady. Once he gets Antonio Brown back, I think that will help. Getting Rob Gronkowski back this week certainly helped. We've said on the show before, despite their age, despite the fact that they've lost a couple steps, Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski are still Tom Brady's guys, and he looks a lot different when those guys are on the field. But, Brad, what do you think about does that help Jonathan Taylor's MVP case?
I mean, I think it definitely helps. I think the issue is you would need a scenario where the Colts are like 12-2 right now, right? And it's not only are the quarterbacks floundering, but the Colts are also a dominant team. And look, they very well could catch the Titans and maybe win the AFC South with all those injuries in Tennessee, and that would certainly help if they win their division and let's say go 12-5 or something like that. But a 500 football team right now, I mean, I don't even know how you make the argument, not even, just from the whole positional value perspective, but value leads to wins, so that's not even there right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, you guys were basically mentioning it all. I mean, I really thought that if Derrick Henry was healthy and kept up the pace that he had, that you can make an argument for him. But I've always felt like the MVP award is a quarterback award. Unless you have a season like an Adrian Peterson had when he came back from his ACL, I could see that fine. But for Taylor, for the Colts record, and especially nothing against Taylor, he's a great running back, but that offensive line is also one of the best in the NFL, especially when they're healthy. So I think all things considered, when you put it all together, when the voters come together to make their vote, I think it's going to be a quarterback in the end. If the Colts could somehow bounce back, win this division, is going on a crazy hot streak, and Taylor pulls off just a bunch of crazy numbers, hey, maybe something crazy could happen, but it's hard to envision a running back winning it, especially when the team is 6-6 right now.
Let's look at this outside the box just real quick before we go. Is there a player outside of a quarterback or a running back who you think would deserve the MVP this season? Two names that come to mind, and they're not going to win, but it's fun to at least talk about it. Trent Williams on the 49ers. He's having his best season as an offensive tackle. He's our highest graded offensive lineman by a ton. I think he's got like a 98 point.
Crazy number.
Right now. 98.2 PFF grade. The next highest graded offensive tackle is Tyron Smith, who's got a 93 overall grade. So Trent Williams would be one guy. And just the other guy would be Myles Garrett. If he continues to pile up these sacks, which he's been really dominant so far this season. He's another one of our highest graded defensive players. He would be another interesting name to throw out there if it's not just going to be, the best quarterback in the NFL. But are any other names that you would toss out there?
I mean, it's really hard to pick anybody else right now who could actually even have a slight chance at an MVP award. Of course, those guys, I mean, you kind of mentioned it, they're not going to, but like, who else out there is there? Like, could you maybe say Cooper Kupp? Probably not what the Rams are doing right now. I mean, like, he's probably like the top receiver in the NFL right now. I mean, running back wise, with no Derrick Henry, the next option will be Taylor. There aren't many guys that really stick out. I mean, I don't think J.C. Jackson is a guy who could win it. I mean, it's just, no, it's not. It's a quarterback award. A quarterback is going to win it most likely, and that's how it's always been for the most part.
I do think the Garrett mention is a worthy mention, but again, it comes back to record, unfortunately. But I think he is arguably the 33rd most valuable player in football by a decent margin right now. I mean, you watch that game, not even just rushing the passer, but I mean, against the run and chasing guys 30 yards downfield, and he beat Lamar Jackson to the first down marker from the opposite side. I mean, he is. I said this on Twitter the other day. I think it might be true. He might be the best athlete on planet Earth right now. If you just combine speed, size, skill, all of it. That was a response to some video of him playing basketball. I mean, the guy can do everything. But again, unfortunately, the wins aren't really following.
All right. Well, I think that will do it for this week's show. I did want to say that I was talking to Jesse Bates a couple of weeks ago, the Bengals safety, and he basically said, if you've got a quarterback and you've got a pass rusher, then you're probably going to wind up being a pretty good team. And that's kind of what they've got right there with the Bengals right now with Joe Burrow and their pass rush right now. It really does change a team. So outside of a quarterback, a guy who can actually get after the quarterback, at some point maybe we'll be in the conversation for the MVP. But yeah, not at this point. But keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis. Use code CYBER40 for 40% off any PFF subscription. I wrote a piece today on Mac Jones and his catchable footballs, which have lowered the Patriots' overall drop rate. So read that as well. Follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. And follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. We will see you again next Monday at 1